do these three characters have in common? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We have been reading and watching and playing the same story for thousands of years. Whether it's the rise of an astute lawyer, the birth of a super being, or a fish looking for his son, the tragic death of two lovers, the vengeance of an actualized former slave, the exasperated and desperate cling to survival of Mother Earth, or even a guy who got bit by a spider. We are experiencing the same story over and over again, and the clever writer will do their best to conceal and obfuscate this fact. It is not immediately evident that these three characters are the same, but rest assured, they are. They are each a hero. And I'm talking a hero from the traditional literary sense. While each of their journeys are completely different, their lives not resembling one another even slightly, they all have the same story. Let's take another look at a Joseph Campbell quote. Life has no meaning. Each of us has meaning, and we bring it to life. It is a waste to be asking the question when you are the answer. Joseph Campbell, the writer of The Power of Myth, and perhaps most famously, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, said this to explain why the concept of hero fits our paradigm so neatly. The hero is us. The hero seeks to remind us that our lives are innately meaningless, and so it is up to us to make meaning from our lives. But how do heroes help us with that? The narrative technique is called the hero's journey. It is the classic narrative structure, repeated countless times by countless storytellers throughout time, even those working in card games. Now, obviously, this is a channel dedicated to the trading card game Flesh and Blood, so you might be wondering why I'm talking about this here. And the reason is, I think I finally figured out what the Living Legend system is. In every card game, the developers will eventually have to address the way in which they want to handle card rotation. There's the classic Magic technique of simply rotating out cards that came into the format 2 years ago, but there's also the timeless Yu-Gi-Oh technique of never rotating anything ever, but choosing to instead constantly soft rotate their card pools via power creep, or bans. Or there's some other flavor of one of those two. It is an inescapable problem in card games. When there's so much bloat, how can developers reasonably design new cards without breaking some core aspect of the game? Or how does the game simply not die due to its own power creep problem? LSS, though, the Flesh and Blood developers, have introduced a unique system to handle this. This system is called Living Legend. What this means is that each time a hero wins an official tournament, they accrue Living Legend points. Eventually, depending on the meta and power of the hero, all heroes will accrue enough Living Legend points to reach a Living Legend status. Once the status is reached, the hero is retired from the main competitive format. They are sent off to the land of Living Legend. This makes sets function effectively like patch notes of any other online game you play. Some heroes get new cards, buffs, and some heroes get some cards banned, nerfs. But, most importantly, if you are a particular flavor of Ice Wizard enjoyer, you at some point played Icelander. Icelander is an elemental wizard with the Ice Essence. She was an incredibly strong hero who spent many months freezing her opponents to death. She won many major tournaments, including Michael Hamilton's World Run, and nearly won a back-to-back Worlds Championship with Xing Sang's version of the deck. Icelander is now Living Legend, though, and this means there are, at the time of this writing, no Ice Wizard heroes available in the main competitive format. This will not always be the case, though. As LSS have stated, their intention is to reprint new versions of heroes that share the type lines of rotated heroes. In this case, the class, talent, and essence type of Icelander. So, we may not see Icelander as she is ever again in the classic constructed format, but we will see an Ice Wizard again, given time. For so long, I had tried to wrap my head around what the Living Legend is supposed to be from a narrative standpoint, but it wasn't until I returned to my roots as a storyteller that I finally put the pieces together. The Living Legend system is the hero's journey. And while this might seem evident based on how the script has gone so far, what may not be so obvious is how incredible a feat that actually is. We're talking about a meta-narrative which takes place in a card game about miniature narratives. Narratives which are born out over competitive seasons that last a year. We're talking about a number system which truly, and perhaps haphazardly, captures the feeling of a hero's journey so perfectly, it's flooring. And so with that preamble, let's actually explain what a hero's journey is and why the living legend system fits so well. A hero's journey is, put very simply, a structure to a story. The structure is completely agnostic of content and protagonist, meaning it applies to both superheroes and single mothers, and almost universally follows this exact structure. Part 1. The normal world. The normal world is the world before the story. It is used to establish where we are, who we are, and what we are. For example, Peter Parker is a normal high school student who likes normal high school student things. He's got a crush, a friend or two, and a bully or two. Or, in the case of, let's say, my favorite hero, Briar, she's a seedling born on the edge of Candlehold, with both the essence of lightning and earth. Her normal world is one first of great anguish, being attacked by the brambles and thorns of the thick flora surrounding Candlehold. But then, she is found by the elders, and is nurtured into a powerful swordswoman and magic dealer. Part 2. The Inciting Incident. The Inciting Incident is the most important moment in the entire story. A weak inciting incident will only serve to confuse the audience forever. Not nailing this will kill the story. An inciting incident, also known as the call to adventure, should be as clear and present and thematically related as you can possibly make it. Can you guess what Peter Parker's inciting incident is? Yeah, it's the spider. Back to Briar though. Hers is that she is the first of the Rosetta to be both blessed by the powers of Daphne and the flow of Aria. She is the chosen of the Candlehold, and therefore is the first of the Rosetta to be able to leave the idyllic, but ultimately sham, Groven paradise. Part 3. Refusal of the Call. Peter refuses to stop a robber with his powers. This ends up, spoiler alert, killing his uncle. In the case of Briar, we're not quite sure where she could have refused her call. The moment in her life is obvious though. It would be near the moment she's tasked to leave the grove, but refuses for fear of her own safety in the dangerous world of Wraith. Part 4. Meeting the Mentor. While Peter misses his Uncle Ben dearly, his Aunt May steps in to become Peter's mentor, representing both herself and his uncle. The wise elders who understand the power of responsibility. The mentor is an incredibly powerful character in any given story. They are the sage. They are the audience as well. They can see the great flaw in the character before the character sees it in themselves. In Briar's case, the mentor is absolutely the Queen of Candlehold, who scoops Briar from her growth state. We have some better examples of mentors in the form of actual mentors, the famous cards originally printed in Blitz decks, which served as a narrative element to show how your hero got where they are today. Cards like Minerva, Chief Rukatan, Hala Goldenhelm, Lady Barthamont, Lord Sutcliffe, and the Librarian. These cards are packed with flavor, and I hope one day they make a return. Part 5. Crossing the Threshold. This is where Act 1 of the story ends. It is a point in which the hero can no longer sit idly by, refusing their call to adventure. They must venture forth and achieve their destiny. In Peter's case, it is upgrading his suit and heading out to fight some baddies. He has decided to no longer be a bitter teenager and instead venture out to help those in need. The obvious moment for Briar, of course, is her stepping out of Candlehold, off on her lifelong adventure across Aria. Part 6. Tests, allies, and enemies. This is a pretty big chunk of the typical story, also known as the trials section, in which the hero attempts their plan and is rewarded for some things and punished for others. In the case of Peter Parker, he meets the Green Goblin and discovers that the world may not value Spider-Man as much as he had thought, and is able to save Mary Jane during an attack on a festival. This is where the second-person nature of game narrative comes into play. This is where the player, you, take over the story of Briar, or live it vicariously through your favorite players and Pro Tour streams, Battle Hardens, and Callings. The tests phase is all about learning, growing, and changing tactics to adapt to the world of the hero's journey. Part 7. The Abyss. The Abyss, also known as the Ordeal, is a moment in which the narrative stakes are raised significantly. In the case of Peter Parker, it is the moment in Spider-Man when, spoiler alert, Willem Dafoe's character notices the cut on Peter's arm at dinner, thereby discovering that Peter is Spider-Man. This gives Willem Dafoe, also known as Green Goblin, a new angle of attack. Most of the time, the Ordeal or Abyss shortly precedes a crucial moment in the story, the death of the Mentor. Green Goblin then, of course, will attack Aunt May shortly after the Abyss. Sometimes death of the Mentor is part of the Abyss, and sometimes it's treated as a separate section of the story. Old people dying 65% of the way through basically every story can get a little repetitive, so I'm inclined to let this be a point of obfuscation in the structure. What we then see in Flesh and Blood is the concept of performance. As your character waxes and wanes in the meta, maybe you decide to pack away your favorite Bolton deck to bust out something a little more on meta. This is where your hero is at their lowest. They're not played. Your hero sits in a box, not trying to win on the road of their hero's journey. Part 8. Seizing the Sword. This is where many stories can differ significantly in their meaning. The sword here is metaphorical. The sword is a new weapon the protagonist can use to defeat their opposition. Sometimes it is actually a sword, but many times it is something as simple as love, which is the case with Peter Parker as well. He and Mary Jane hold hands in May's hospital room. That's the sword. Right there. And here's where things get really impressive and serendipitous. We've all, by this point, chosen a hero who we want to ride into the sunset. They're fun, they're good, and then a new grouping of cards gets revealed which we believe will push our hero over the top. I'm thinking of cards like Swarming Gloom Veil, or Codex of Frailty, or Starstruck, or Tome of Imperial Flame. These are the cards which send our hero over the top. They are to become anointed to be the next living legend. It's time to hit the gas and defeat our final opponents. Whatever the fatal flaw of our hero was, it's gone. Part 9. The Road Back. This is the section of the story in which the hero, armed with their new knowledge, their new resolve, is ready to leave the story world and re-enter the normal world. To do that, though, they will have to overcome the final conflict. This section is usually broken out into several little sections as the deepest pit, the moment in which the hero decides to give up on their quest, and the ally attack scene, which is when the closest confidant of the hero tells them what they've been missing all along. Anyway, the Green Goblin kidnaps Mary Jane. This is the climax of the film, and it's perfect because it is a reflection of all the themes of the story. The more Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man, the more he jeopardizes his loved ones. The more he leans into his glib, uncaring persona, the more those around him will respond in kind. When he saves those he loves and citizens he doesn't know, he is being reborn as Spider-Man, the one who has the ability to balance both the hero and the normal person. Being reborn is the most crucial moment in the story. It signifies that the story is over and we have left Act 2. And just as soon as our hero came into play, so too are they preparing to leave. We watch with bated breath each tournament, checking standings and top 8s, wondering if our hero has the chance to pull down yet another tournament. Yet another chunk of the pie that will send them off into the sunset. Part 10. Return with the Elixir. It becomes apparent, after feeding Green Goblin, that Peter is a changed man. Mary Jane professes her love to him. And yes, I know it's super stupid, but this is technically the ultimate reward section of the hero's journey. Oftentimes the love interest is the ultimate reward, and I wish it wasn't. The elixir in this case, though, is Peter's recognition of Uncle Ben's words. With great power comes great responsibility. So, instead of running off with Mary Jane, Peter says, "Let's be pals," because he realizes he can't put his loved ones in danger just because he is Spider-Man. He's got a responsibility now. In order to become the hero, he needs to slough off the child that is Peter Parker. The same goes for our heroes in Fab. They go off on their journey, enter our lives, bring us joy and memories, trials and heartbreak. Our heroes whisk us off to faraway lands to compete against the like-minded strangers, and then retire eventually, after we've grown with them. But that's not the whole story. There's a really important aspect left out, and that's that there's a secondary hero's journey which exists beneath the first one. This is the one that writers use. The writer is going to use the plot of the story to obfuscate the emotional change of the protagonist. This is the one I use when I write my stories. The construct of an actual hero's journey is all about flaws. The hero or protagonist or main character, whatever you want to call them, have an innate flaw. This flaw is what we call a fatal flaw, because if the hero cannot overcome this fatal flaw, they will die. Metaphorically, but also sometimes literally. The character flaw has the inciting incident built in. Peter is weak-willed and nervous. He's childish and immature. He is an easy target. This is a wonderful place to start for Peter as Spider-Man in a story about growing up and accepting responsibility. The only reason Uncle Ben's power speech resonates is because Peter is exactly not that. The real reason the story takes place is because Peter needs to grow up. He's ashamed of who he is, a nerd, a loser, an object of ridicule. But what's worse, he is unwilling and unable to stand up for himself. He is a coward. And Peter will do everything he can throughout the film to not admit this, even go so far as taking on a new persona of Spider-Man who he will allow to be confident just so Peter doesn't have to. This is also when we learn about the character's external goal. Their external goal is the one we see in the plot of the story, and the internal goal is the one the writer is hiding in the narrative. In the case of Peter, his external goal is Mary Jane. He has a crush on her and wishes he was cool enough for her to like him back. Before we get to part 2, I need to talk about what villains are. Villains are the inverted representation of the hero. Oftentimes, the villain wants the same thing as the hero, but will go about it in a different way. It's incredibly important to note that villains and heroes are the same characters, and that the only difference is that the hero overcomes their fatal flaw, and the villain does not. Be thinking about who you consider Fab villains as we continue on with this part of the video. The antagonist, the bad guy, is the mirrored reflection of the hero. They are, in effect, the tragic version of the hero. They experience the same external conflict and internal conflict, but approach it in the opposite fashion. Ever heard the line,
"We aren't so different, you and I"?
Yes, of course you have, because the villain always says that, and it is always true. Did you ever find it strange that the villain asks something like,
"We can work together"?
Norman Osborn is our villain in Spider-Man. The through line between the two characters is respect. While Peter wants respect and to be considered cool, Osborn wants respect as a professional. He wants to be highly regarded by his superiors, and when they don't provide that for him, he snaps. The thing about Norman's plan, though, is it will lead to his ultimate destruction. The pitfalls of overconfidence are the aggression and violence with an uncaring personality. Take this in contrast to Peter, whose Spider-Man persona becomes the confident and strong, while Norman's Green Goblin persona tortures him and belittles him. With that, we have our major emotional plot and two characters to exist as the argument between two different approaches. How should one achieve respect? Do you see where we're going here? There are heroes, and there are villains in Flesh and Blood. It is okay to care for villains, and it is okay to play as villains. In fact, villains are often who we sympathize with more than we do heroes, because most often, we as regular people haven't overcome our fatal flaws yet. Who do you think are the villains of Fab? I've been working on this theory myself, And I've decided there's a metric I like to use to compartmentalize the different legends and whether they are heroic or villainous. This metric I now dub the "Did they do it the right way?" We now have a decent number of heroes in the living legend status. The current list is as follows in chronological order: Bravo star of the show, Chain, Prism, Oldhim, Lexi, Briar, and Icelander. Of these, I consider 4 to be heroes. Take a quick guess as to which you think. Alright, my list is Chain, Prism, Oldhim, and Briar. Wait, don't click away. Let me explain my reasoning. A common narrative thread throughout the Fab community is the idea of whether a hero did it the right way. Which means, as best as I can tell, did the hero earn the living legend points over a decent length of time, and are they remembered fondly by the opponents of the heroes? Starvo is our control test. No one considers that Starvo did it the right way. He exploded onto the format and dominated the entire conversation of Fab until he was swiftly cast away. He used cards that weren't designed for him and pummeled everyone in his path until he was gone. But most importantly, he never developed his own sense of identity. For Starvo to become a hero, he would have needed to have cards leave his pool, so much so that he would have needed to develop a completely new style in order to win. Chain is our next hero. And while I know many old heads think of Chain as a boogeyman, he never stepped out of his bounds. He didn't steal cards from other heroes. He was also, along with Prism, the only hero keeping that nasty bastard Starvo at bay. Chain was around for a surprisingly long time and went through many trials on his way to living legend. I do consider him a hero. Prism is divisive. I know that. But Prism never had the dominating meta share. She was around for a significantly long time, and she is among the most beloved heroes in Fab history. I know it's painful, Spectre haters, but Prism's only fault was she overstayed her welcome. I have to give her credit for that. Oldhim. Yeah, he was quite the monster when he was at his peak, but it took him a long time to get there. Significant meta shifts of Prism leaving the format boosted him significantly. He received ban after ban after ban, and he still persisted to bash the heroes around the meta. While I rank him high as my least favorite character to play against, I gotta give the old man props for warping the meta, defining it, taking on absurd amounts of abuse, and weathering that storm until the bitter end. And Briar. Briar is a short one because she's my favorite hero ever, and there are some people out there who legitimately think Joffrey was a good guy, and some other people who say Thanos did nothing wrong or whatever, and this one can be mine. Briar can't be a villain because she just can't, and this is my YouTube channel. I'm just kidding. I think the thing that ultimately makes Briar a hero is while she was a brutal opponent, she did something very unique in Fab in that nearly half of her deck is generic cards. And she had to pivot to a completely different deck archetype just to get over the line, eschewing her tried and true Channel Mount Heroic card in favor of a fistful of 3-for-7s to fatigue her way to the glorious end. I miss her every day. I think what's valuable about categorizing these things and noting them down as we go into the distant future that Flesh and Blood has before it is to construct a more robust vocabulary for how we, the players, understand the game. What is always surprising to me about studying not just Fab, but games in general, are the little ways they each draw from ancient techniques to get people to feel something. All stories are vehicles for emotion, and all heroes are vehicles for change. Most games staple a story onto the mechanics and call it a day. But the ones who integrate the narrative elements into the interactive portion are the ones which succeed. Take this. The ideal world of a Fab player is to pick up a hero when they're young, go to some sealed events and some blitz events while they build out their collection. As their hero grows and swells, so too do the players themselves, making friendships and friendly nemeses. Living in the card game space is about being on the suboptimal path and learning how to navigate it just as your hero would have to navigate their suboptimal path in their world. No one is perfect. No one had a perfect upbringing, and no one will have a perfect end. But for these few moments we have in the game, and for these brief glimpses of time we have with our heroes, both of the heroic and villainous variety, we can take solace that we aren't in this alone. And so I view it as the job of Gorgonian Tome to help everyone see the game, to notice the game, to notice the little emotional contracts and payoffs we make and take from the game to better understand ourselves and art as play. Realizing that the heroes are given to us right as their inciting incident takes place was a big one for me, because the innate second-person nature of Ludo-Narrative is gifted to the players to shape the story of a hero. We are the ones who decide whether a hero is heroic or villainous. And we are the ones who get to decide how a legend in this game is remembered. Thanks for watching.